Shri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Radha Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shamakunda Radhakunda ki Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Shri Navadvip Dham ki jai. Shri Mathura Dham ki jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Tulsi Devi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Ganga Maya ki jai. Jamuna Maya ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. Shama Veda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Narayanam namaskrityam naram shaivam narotaram devim saraswatim yasam tato jayamudidayat nasta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 2nd chapter, text 14. Yasya Nuraga Pluta Asa Rasa Lila Valoka Prati Labda Manaha Praja Striyo Drigbir Anupavrita Dio Patastuhu Kilo Krita Sheshaha Yasanugra Plutahasarasa Yasyanuraga Plutahasarasa Vilavaloka Pratilabda Manaha Rajastriyo Drigbira Nupavitra Yovatastu Kilos Krita Seshaha Yasna Nuraga Plutahasa Rasa Lila Valoka Pratilabda Manaha Rajastriyo Drigbira Nupavivrita Diyo Vatastu Kila Kritya Seshaha Yasya, whose? Anuraga, attachment. Pluta, enhanced by. Hasa, laughter. Rasa, humors. Lila, pastimes. Avaloka, glancing. Pratilabda, obtained thereof. Manaha, anguished. Rajastriyaha, damsels of Raja. Dirigbihi, with the eyes. Anupravritaha, following. Diyaha, by intelligence. Avatastuhu, sat silently. Kila, indeed. Kritya Seshaha, without finishing household duties. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The damsels of Raja, after pastimes of laughter, humor, and exchanges of glances, were anguished when Krishna left them. They used to follow him with their eyes, and thus they sat down with stunned intelligence and could not finish their household duties. Responsibly, the damsels of Raja, after pastimes of laughter, humor and exchanges of glances, were anguished when Krishna left them. They used to follow him with their eyes, and thus they sat down with stunned intelligence and could not finish their household duties. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In his boyhood at Vrindavan, Lord Krishna was notorious as a teasing friend in transcendental love to all the girls his age. His love for them was so intense that there was no comparison to that ecstasy, and the damsels of Raja were so much attached to him that their affection excelled that of the great demigods, like Brahma and Shiva. Lord Krishna finally admitted his defeat before the transcendental affection of the gopis and declared that he was unable to repay them for their unalloyed affection. Although the gopis were seemingly anguished by the Lord's teasing behavior, when Krishna would leave them, they could not tolerate the separation and used to follow him with their eyes and minds. They were so stunned by the situation that they could not finish their household duties. No one could excel him, even in the dealing of love exchanged between boys and girls. It is said in the revealed scriptures that Lord Krishna personally never goes beyond the boundary of Vrindavan. He remains there eternally because of the transcendental love of the inhabitants. Thus, even though he is not visible at present, he is not away from Vrindavan for a moment. In the verse again, the damsels of Raja, after pastimes of laughter, humor, and exchanges of glances, were anguished when Krishna left them. They used to follow him with their eyes, and thus they sat down with stunned intelligence and could not finish their household duties. This verse kind of anticipates a lot of what is written in the 10th canto and in Krishna book, the summary of the 10th canto. Very intimate pastimes between Krishna and the gopis and Radharani. Very difficult to comment on, so I'm going to read the purport again. In his boyhood in Vrindavan, Lord Krishna was notorious as a teasing friend and transcendental love to all the girls his age. His love for them was so intense that there is no comparison to that ecstasy. And the damsels of Raja were so much attached to him that their affection excelled that of the great demigods like Brahma and Shiva. Lord Krishna finally admitted his defeat before the transcendental affection of the gopis and declared that he was unable to repay them for their unalloyed affection. Although the gopis were seemingly anguished by the Lord's teasing behavior, when Krishna would leave them, they could not tolerate the separation and used to follow him with their eyes and minds. They were so stunned by the situation that they could not finish their household duties. No one could excel him, even in the dealing of love exchanged between boys and girls. It is said that in the revealed scriptures that Lord Krishna personally never goes beyond the boundary of Vrindavan. He remains there eternally because of the transcendental love of the inhabitants. Thus, even though he is not visible at present, he is not away from Vrindavan for a moment. And in the verse again, the damsels of Raja, after pastimes of laughter, humor, and exchanges of glances, were anguished when Krishna left them. They used to follow him with their eyes, and they sat down sat down with stunned intelligence and could not finish their household duties. Om Agyanati Mirandasya Garananjana Salakaya Chaksurn Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. These very intimate dealings between Krishna and the residents of Raja are very difficult to understand, and sometimes they're enumerated, or in Prabhupada's writings, that they are different from what we understand are the relationships between boys and girls. The relationships in the spiritual world or in Braja are like gold, and according to what Prabhupada has written, the dealings in the material world between boys and girls are like iron. So it's very possible that the dimension that we don't see in the spiritual world is existing, even though we don't see it, and we can attain to it, even though it may take many lifetimes. After all, it is the perfection of life, but it's very difficult to understand. So things were because they're very difficult to understand, many things were written down by Vyasadeva. Vyasadeva realized that in the age of Kali that people would have very short memories, and they wouldn't be able to remember many things. Some devotees that had identities in Krishna Lila, like the 6 Goswamis, they could remember many details of the pastimes, the intimate pastimes between Krishna and Radha. But Vyasadeva, knowing that things were not possible to remember very easily in the age of Kali, which was just beginning, he decided to write them down. And so he wrote the Srimad Bhagavatam and compiled all the Puranas, and he's variously known as the author and the compiler, according to the different things that Prabhupada has said. So he was writing, and Prabhupada himself took up the task of writing things down. It's interesting that in the Madhya Lila, I think it's the 5th chapter, texts number 81 and 82, the word patra is encountered. And the Sanskrit word, I don't know Sanskrit very well, but the Sanskrit word patra means technically leaf. And in the one verse, I think it's the 81st verse, Prabhupada translates it as paper. And in the 82nd verse, he translated it as paper, leaf paper. It actually means leaf. Patra means leaf. So things were written down. And we have many pictures, they're here, of Rupa and Sanatan writing things down. And Prabhupada did this. Sometimes he would awaken at 2 or 3 in the morning to translate his books. And as he told his devotees, his only complaint was that he spent a lot of energy writing all these books down, translating, and that people weren't reading these books. So I make it a promise in initiating people. I don't initiate very many people, but I make them a promise to read the books a certain amount every day. One of the things that Prabhupada taught us was that we should read to the point where we're able to write something on occasion, at least something, even if it's only 1 or 2 sentences every day, in the sense of putting something in writing. Of course, now it's a lot easier because in the speech-to-text protocol, at least in the iPhones, and I think in all Androids and all handheld devices, you can speak, and the words are automatically, as you speak, they're transcribed. So you don't have to speak into a dictaphone and wait for someone to transcribe them. It's done, actually, the technology is available so that it's done for you. And as you speak, the words are transcribed. Prabhupada wrote most of his books with a dictaphone machine. So our principle of Yukta Vairagya is that we can use all this technological advance, dictaphones, airplanes, cars, medicine. If it's used in the service of Krishna, it becomes purified. Anasaktasi visham yatarham upayunjita. The verse ends with Yukta Vairagya Uchate, that everything can be used for Krishna theoretically. If it's used for Krishna, it becomes purified. And if it's not used for Krishna, it's kind of bondage. If we walk down the main streets of many cities, we can hear very obnoxious, I think it's obnoxious, most people don't think it's obnoxious, but loud thumping music. And that's what people admire. And because there are so many advances in the musical industry and in the industry of medicine and flight and communication, there's a thought that it's all getting better, that all these material advances are getting better. Prabhupada writes in the introduction to the Srimad Bhagavatam that every place, and he came to the United States because he was asked by his spiritual master to preach among the English-speaking people, and he thought that of all the English-speaking people, the people in the United States were the most advanced in terms of education, in terms of development, in terms of power, in terms of military strength. So he after many years of thinking about where he should go to speak to the English-speaking people, he decided to come to the USA. And it was very difficult. he found that people were very immersed in sense gratification, and he often tells the story about one of his godbrothers from Germany who spoke in England to a very highly advanced English person who was the governor of Bengal. What's his name? Marquis something. Yeah, Marquis of Zetland. That's his name, Zetland. Z-E-T-L-A-N-D. Z-E-T-L-A-N-D. Marquis of Zetland. And the former Bengal governor said to this devotee, one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, that I want to become a Brahmin. What do I have to do? Can you make me a Brahmin? And he said, of course I can make you a Brahmin. You just have to follow these 4 things. And he told him what the 4 principles were. And the man said, oh, that's impossible. So people think that the following 4 regulated principles is impossible. Many are enamored with the glitter, I call it the glitter, of Krishna consciousness in the beginning, because things are so clean, people are so friendly, music is so nice, food is so wonderful, delicious. But after a while they realize that people are happy and dancing because they're undergoing some austerities. They're not having illicit sex, they're not having intoxications, they're not eating meat, they're not intoxicating themselves. So they realize that after a while it's not, it appears to be very, very wonderful dancing and singing and happiness and friendliness, but it's actually a difficult course. And when Prabhupada was confronted about the fact that many devotees that he had even initiated were leaving the Krishna consciousness movement, they were going away from the temple, they were succumbing to various forms of sense gratification, he said we shouldn't be surprised, because it's very difficult. We shouldn't be surprised how many people leave the Krishna consciousness movement. We should be surprised how many people stay in the Krishna consciousness movement. This is his way of solacing people who were upset that some of their godbrothers and godsisters that they had intimate relationships were leaving. And one devotee, who's not here any longer, I think her name was Mandali Kishore, used to work in the Goshala. And she said that several of her colleagues that lived in the ladies' ashram had left the movement after they had been there for some time. And the reason was, I guess, that they weren't reading Prabhupada's books. And they had bought into other types of philosophy that were, in the mode of goodness, but not Krishna conscious at all. So they thought this was an interesting chapter in their lives, but one that has to be left behind. So that happens quite often. People are enamored by propaganda. They're enamored for different reasons. It's very difficult to remain in Krishna consciousness. One reason is that there are very deeply buried sinful activities, deeply buried in the heart. They may be from past lives, they may be from the present life. Another reason is that Krishna is not so easily, as we were seeing, it's very hard to understand, and he's not so readily available. Another reason is that the strength of material nature is very powerful, very powerful. I think Prabhupada ended one lecture by saying that, and Johnny Walker is still going strong. And there was a uproarious laughter because they wondered why a sadhu would refer to whiskey. That's what Johnny Walker is anyway. So things were written down from the very beginning, and as we've seen in the illustrations of Rupa and Sanatan, that they were very seriously engaged in writing things down. And it's interesting that in those verses that I mentioned in the Chaitanya Chaitamrita, the 5th chapter, 81st and 82nd verse, Prabhupada translates the word patra as leaf paper, and in the verse when he actually speaks the translation, he uses the term black and white. And this relates to the story of Sakshi Gopal. You know the story. So the young Brahmin called all the village elders together, and he said that I'm going to try to bring the deity, Sakshi Gopal is now called, from Vrindavan, which is a long ways away, to Vidyanagar, down south, in the south of India. It's a distance of about 1,000 kilometers. It's quite a long ways. And he said, I want you to sign this paper, and that if Gopal comes here and witnesses this transaction, that the marriage can go ahead. What had happened was that the brother of the bride to be and the son of the aristocratic Brahmin that he served so diligently said that if this marriage went through, he would commit suicide. And so he told his father, he said, you can support me by just saying you don't remember what you said. But the younger Brahmin remembered very clearly what he said, and that he made a promise to him in front of this deity. So he asked all of the village elders to sign this paper, saying that Gopal came to witness the transaction, that the marriage would go ahead. And he said, and I want to get this. I want you to write this down in black and white. That's the phrase that Prabhupada used: black and white. In Kali Yuga, the idea of writing something down has become very important. Just as I was mentioning, the technologists in mobile telephones have devised a system whereby you can speak and it can be transcribed instantaneously. And in courts of law, that's considered primary evidence. And evidence that's just told and not written anywhere is considered circumstantial. It's not as important. So whether it's verbal or whether it's written down, it makes a big difference. And Prabhupada knew this, and he knew that there's a phenomenon called Shrutidar, when people can remember every word that was spoken to them, every word that was spoken to them by their spiritual master. And he narrates a particular case of some English people that got in an argument somewhere in Vrindavan, and it became a very intense argument until one of them actually murdered the other one. But there was no evidence. The incident was brought to a court of law, and there was no witnesses, and there was nothing to tell what was being said. But it so happened that there was a Brahmin who heard everything that they said. And this Brahmin, according to this story that Prabhupada tells, was kind of a carryover from days of being able to remember everything. And even though he didn't know English, he remembered. He was a witness in the courtroom. He remembered everything that they said, and word for word, verbatim, even though he didn't know what the words meant. And the evidence was so strong that the court admitted his evidence, and it was put into the record. It was all written down. It was typed by the court stenographer, and it resulted in a conviction. And one of the men was convicted of murder, and he paid his dues, so to speak. I don't know what it's like, but sometimes they're executed. I think it took something like 1 year before the person who fired the fatal gun at Mahatma Gandhi to be executed. He was punished. I think he was executed to death. He was either hung or, I don't know if they use the electric chair in India. But anyway, he was sentenced to death. So it's a very difficult thing if the thing is not in writing. It must be written down. And Prabhupada knew that this was a phenomenon that only began in Kali Yuga. And the story of the witness Gopal is the witness Gopal actually came. He actually moved from Vrindavan in North India to Vidyanagar in South India, and he made a pact with the young Brahmin that he wouldn't intervene, but he did. He walked and walked and walked all this great distance, and he became the witness. And this temple is still very popular. The Sakshi Gopal Witness Gopal Temple. If you've ever been to Jagannath Puri, there's a big sign on very nearby with an arrow pointing to the Sakshi Gopal Temple in Odisha, formerly Orissa. So it's very important. And Prabhupada knew that people could remember. This phenomenon only occurred in Kali Yuga when people had to write. And it's become an aphorism that in Kali Yuga, remembering means to remember to write it down. Remembering means to write it down. So everything has to be written. So when this age first started, Vyasadeva started this whole process of writing things down. And we can say that Prabhupada is the ultimate Shiksha Guru of ISKCON because his books like the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita and Nectar of Instruction and Nectar of Devotion became the gospel truth for all devotees. They were written down and they were studied. And he did say in 1972, when the Nectar of Devotion was first printed, and he translated most of Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in summary. So it would have come to, he said, 1,000 pages if he had commented on each and every verse one at a time. He said, and this is almost a verbatim quote, in Los Angeles, that now I have completed the Nectar of Devotion. So every one of you must read this book repeatedly. Not just once, but repeatedly. I'm trying to say what Prabhupada said verbatim. But he did say that every one of you must read this book repeatedly. In other words, he was saying, he went on to say that you shouldn't try to get me to answer every question that occurs to you as you're reading this book. If you read it again and again, the answers will come to you. You don't have to ask me many things. So he asked that this book be read repeatedly. And then he translated the Chaitanya Chaitamrita a few years later. A lot of it was done in America. Some of it was done in India and other countries. But he was very happy that these books were translated into English because they were in what he called black and white. They stood the test of time. And of course now we have the facility to read these books online or through the Vedabase, but they're the same books. And only recently there has been a tendency to make some very minor revisions in the grammar and the spelling in these books, even though they were written maybe 50 years ago. They have withstood the test of time because they're written down, and our memories are very poor in this age. So this was all started thousands of years ago at the outset of Kali Yuga, when people's memories were very, very deteriorated. We don't remember many things. Like in a court of law, it's a very common thing for a pleader to ask one of the witnesses, where were you on the night of such and such and such and such? And it's impossible to remember where I was 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago or what I was doing at that time. But that's the case. And when Prabhupada was lecturing in Vrindavan, someone asked him, well, why are we being punished for things we did in a previous life if we don't even remember what we were doing? And Prabhupada's rejoinder was, well, do you remember what you were doing like a week ago? Do you remember what you were doing when you were 1 year old? Do you remember what you said to anything? And of course the answer was no, I can't remember. So our memories are very faulty in this age, and therefore things have to be put in what Prabhupada called black and white. And this incident that took place between the two Brahmins was at least 500 years ago, and maybe longer than 500 years ago, because it was narrated by Nityananda Prabhu, and it had obviously taken place more than 500 years ago because he narrated an ancient story, and in the translation the word previously is used. It doesn't say when, how long ago, but it was in Kali Yuga, obviously. But it could have been 500, 1,000, or 2,000 years ago. So Prabhupada put these books before us to help us, to guide us through the difficulties of this age. And many people reject, they think these books are all fantasies, they're not real. Especially like the verses that we were just reading, that they're complete fantasies. It's not possible, but they are possible. And when I think someone told me that when Prabhupada was challenged, are these fantastical estimations that Nanda Maharaj had thousands and thousands and hundreds and thousands of cows and so many things, and Lord Chaitanya was brighter than 1 million suns. Is this poetic license? And that Prabhupada paused for some time, and his retort was, you think I come all the way from India to tell you fairy tales? Of course, that's just what I heard from someone who was present when that was said in a class. Anyway, I'll read the verse again, and if anyone has any comments or questions about anything that was said, the damsels of Vraja, after pastimes of laughter, humor, and exchanges of glances, were anguished when Krishna left them. They used to follow him with their eyes, and thus they sat down with stunned intelligence and could not finish their household duties. So, any comments or questions? Yes? No.
Maharaj, in Prabhupada's report, he mentions Krishna never leaves Vrindavan.
Yeah.
So how do we understand the gopis were bereft of his association when he went to Dwarka and he never returned? So, you know what I mean? It seems to be...
Well, the interesting thing about Krishna is that he can do several things at the same time, or he can be in several places at once. It is, Prabhupada in purport says, it is said, he doesn't say that Krishna never leaves, but there's an aspect, there's a function of Krishna which always does remain in Vrindavan, which never leaves, because he's always immersed in the he's always conquered by the love of his disciples. But at the same time, he's everywhere. He's manifesting in different universes, and he has that. And on the cover of Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a photograph, or a drawing, a painting of Mahavishnu with universes emanating from the pores of his body. So, in addition to being the most lovable person in the universe, he's everywhere at once. And it's described that the vimanas, that the airplanes that exist in the spiritual world, they don't vibrate. They're not noisy and polluting the air. And they can go so much faster than airplanes or rockets that they can go literally millions and millions of miles or kilometers in just a fraction of a second. These things are beyond our capabilities of understanding, because we always think that there's a beginning and there's an end to everything. But in the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, things are eternal. I mean, even the pastimes that we read about in Chaitanya Charitamrita, other books describe that they are repeated, like the pastime of Kaliya, Krishna dancing on his hoods. It's repeated over and over and over again. We think it has a beginning and an end when we read about it, and there's a nice picture in this Bhagavatam of this pastime. But it happens over and over again. And so similarly with all of Krishna's inconceivable pastimes, and it is inconceivable. The word achintya is used as inconceivable. Krishna is everywhere at once, and he can travel faster than anything. And even though he adopts the attitude of an ordinary person sometimes, and he cries real tears, and he's definitely afraid of his mother, Yashoda. But at the same time, he's the ultimate controller of the whole cosmic situation. I don't understand it myself, but that's what I've been reading. Anything else? Okay, we'll end there. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.